Today I want to talk about character, not personality, not temperament, not surface behavior, but character as understood by Wilhelm Reich. Because in Reich's work, character is not something you have, it is something you become, something you build, something you armor yourself with, often without knowing it. Reich believed that character is the living record of how a person learned to survive in a world that repeatedly blocked their emotional and biological expression. Character, in this view, is history made flesh. And once you understand that, you begin to see people and yourself very differently. Who was Wilhelm Reich? Wilhelm Reich was a physician, psychoanalyst, and early student of Sigmund Freud. But unlike Freud, Reich was not content to stay in the realm of symbols, dreams, and interpretations. Reich wanted to know what happens in the body when a human being is emotionally blocked. What happens when expression is punished? What happens when pleasure is forbidden? And most importantly, what kind of human being does that create? Reich's answer was radical. Human beings adapt to emotional repression by hardening, psychologically and physically. That hardening is what he called character armor. What Reich meant by character. In everyday language, we say someone has character or lacks character. Reich rejected that moral framing. For Reich, character is not good or bad, it is functional. Character is a patterned way of responding to life that once served a protective purpose. It is the sum total of emotional defenses, muscular tensions, behavioral habits, attitudes toward pleasure, authority, intimacy, and power. Character is how the nervous system learned to survive. And once established, it operates automatically like a suit of armor you forget you're wearing. Reich observed that people who were emotionally blocked were also physically rigid, tight jaws, shallow breathing, rigid posture, frozen facial expressions. This wasn't metaphorical, it was literal. He called this muscular armor, and he saw it as inseparable from psychological defenses. You cannot repress emotions without also repressing the body. And over time, repression becomes structure. That structure becomes character. How character forms early, not because children are weak, but because children are dependent. When a child expresses anger and is punished, sadness and is mocked, joy and is shamed, sexual curiosity and is threatened, the child learns something crucial. My natural expression is dangerous. So the child adapts, they suppress, they contract, they comply, they perform, and eventually the suppression no longer feels like suppression. It feels like who they are. That is character formation. Character is not conscious. One of Reich's most important insights was this: character defenses are egocentric. That means the person does not experience them as a problem. They experience them as normal. In fact, they often experience emotionally free people as immoral, dangerous, childish, threatening, out of control. Why? Because free expression threatens the armored structure holding them together. Makes sense. The character as a social product. Reich was not interested in individual pathology alone. He believed entire societies could become armored. When repression is systematic through family, religion, schooling, and politics, it produces mass character structures. These structures then reproduce the very systems that created them. In other words, people enforce externally what they have internalized. That is why Reich believed psychology and politics were inseparable. The emotional plague. Reich used a controversial term, the emotional plague. He did not mean illness in the medical sense. He meant a social reaction against life-affirming expression. The emotionally armored person attacks joy, polices sexuality, demonizes freedom, moralizes repression, rationalizes cruelty. Not because they are evil, but because they are defended. Repression, when unrecognized, seeks to reproduce itself. For Reich, sexuality was central, not in a pornographic sense, but in a biological one. He believed the capacity for full, involuntary, orgasmic surrender was a marker of emotional health. When sexual expression is blocked, the body holds tension. That tension feeds anxiety, compulsion, obsession, aggression, moral rigidity. This is why Reich believed sexual repression was not a private issue, but a political one. Repressed societies produce rigid, authoritarian characters. Reich studied fascism not as an ideology, but as a character structure. He observed that authoritarian personalities shared common traits: obsession with order, submission to authority, hatred of weakness, sexual anxiety, moral absolutism, displacement of rage onto outgroups. These were not learned beliefs alone. They were somatic and emotional patterns. The body itself was armored. Reich identified recurring character styles, including the compulsive character, the masochistic character, the narcissistic character, the rigid character, the phallic narcissistic character. Each type represents a different adaptation to blocked expression, but all share one thing in common. They are attempts to control what could not be safely expressed. Why intellect does not break character. One of Reich's most uncomfortable truths is this: you cannot reason someone out of their character armor. Why? Because character defenses are not cognitive. They are biological. They live in muscle tension, breath restriction, emotional reflexes. That's why facts don't change minds when character is threatened, and why moral arguments often fail. The cost of character armor. Character armor protects, but it also imprisons. The armored person may experience chronic dissatisfaction, shallow relationships, sexual difficulty, anxiety or numbness, rage without relief, meaninglessness. But because armor feels like identity, letting go feels like death. Reich understood this deeply, which is why he believed therapy was not about adjustment, but about liberation. The goal, character dissolution. Reich did not aim to improve character. He aimed to dissolve armor. This does not mean chaos. It means restoring the natural capacity for feeling, spontaneity, pleasure, empathy, authentic aggression, emotional depth. Health for Reich was not control, it was flow. Why Reich is still relevant today. In a world obsessed with image, control, performance, moral signaling, ideological rigidity, Reich's insights are more relevant than ever. We are not suffering from a lack of information. We are suffering from rigidity. Until we understand how repression shapes character, we will keep mistaking defense for virtue. Wilhelm Reich did not ask us to be perfect. He asked us to be alive, to notice where we are tight, where we are afraid, where we are frozen. Because character is not destiny. It is an adaptation once understood can change.